Hey everybody, this is Jared from Geek Stuff Off the Cuff, and you are listening to Dayo from the Audacity to Lead podcast. If you're looking to get focused, get started, or be impactful, you're in the right place. If you're looking to have some fun, come on over and check out our podcast at Geek Stuff Off the Cuff. New episodes every Wednesday. You can find us on Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes.
This is episode 24 of Audacity to Lead.
Inspiring actionable content that helps you get focused, get started, and be impactful. This is Audacity to Lead.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Audacity to Lead. This is the podcast where I give you the courage and necessary insight to step out and lead with more influence. If your goal is to succeed in today's world, then this is the podcast for you. Because as a leader, you have a message, you have a passion. And of course, the only way for you to get your message and passion across to people is for you to have your own platform, whether a blog or a podcast. Some hours ago, I think over 24 hours ago, I posted something on Facebook which created some attention. What I posted on Facebook is this. I said, so many people with clear transforming messages think Facebook is the best place to put them. If you don't know, let me tell you, your content is making Facebook rich. The worst is that they are buried deep down other people's timelines. So they don't even get to see your message. They don't get to see what you are trying to share with them. So somehow, I believe if you have to raise a platform, social media is not where you ought to go. Of course, social media has its own place, and we're going to get to that as we go on in this podcast. As we go on, maybe with forthcoming episodes, we are going to talk about that. But today, we are going to look at how you can focus on a specific niche of your blog, for your blog or your podcast. And you are really going to enjoy this episode. And of course, this is your Audacity to Lead. So this episode, we are going to be looking at how you can focus on a specific niche and how you can market your blog or your podcast. My guest on today's episode is Scott Roberts. And Scott Roberts is the host of Firecast podcast, the only podcast I think I know at this moment that focuses on fire foods, hot sauce, chili, and pepper foods. And if you are looking at someone who's having a niche, Scott has a niche, his own podcast and his blog. Further, and I'm going to hear his story, how he got started and how he's able to do all of that. And of course, at the end of this episode, there's a question and answer session where I take questions from listeners. And I think about 4 persons sent in questions, and you are going to enjoy that. And of course, something I'm excited about is that tomorrow, Wednesday, 25th of February, I'm going to be speaking Social Media Week in the podcast section along with JC Onomiwo, and we are going to be talking about how you can tap into the gold mine, the opportunities that exist for podcasts in Africa. And of course, if you are yet to register, you can go ahead and register right now. It is free. Just go ahead to audacitytolead.com/SMW. It will automatically redirect you to where to register. That is audacitytolead.com/SMW. That is Social Media Week. So that's SMW, audacitytolead.com/SMW. Without wasting so much of your time, let's get into this episode. And don't forget, everything we are going to talk about on this episode can be found at audacitytolead.com/24. So let's go. I'm excited. This is a sunny afternoon, and I have Scott Roberts from weeklyfirecast.com. Scott Roberts is the host of Firecast podcast, and Scott is a hot sauce, spicy food, and BBQ reviewer. He's a columnist and blogger. He's a voiceover artist and podcaster, Christian, and proud patriot. And the good thing is, he's a single dad. Scott, I'm excited to have you on the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being on your podcast.
Thank you so much. So, if somebody is getting to know you for the first time, how would you describe yourself to someone who's getting to know you for the first time?
Well, you mentioned a lot of different things. I do wear, the expression wearing many different hats. I do a lot of different things. It usually depends on how they approach me uh, and how I will answer that question. So if it's kind of food related, I will kind of go into the angle, well, I'm a blogger about food. I do a podcast on food. I've been writing about spicy foods and barbecue for a number of years. Other times, if it's more business oriented, I will tell them about my background as a website developer, marketing online, building a blog, or I might take the whole approach of a voiceover artist as well, which I also do. But yeah, I do many different things, wear many different hats. I try to utilize my skills the best I can for my many different passions. Sometimes they crisscross and they connect. Other times I could do 10 different things throughout the course of the day, and they all have nothing to do with one another. But I'm mainly a blogger, a podcaster, and a voiceover artist.
Great. So how did you get started with blogging?
Blogging, since I do have a background as a website developer, whatever interest I've had, whatever passion, just the topics I've been into, I've always created a website for. It's a personal thing of mine. For instance, I used to be in guitar playing and then the rock band Van Halen. So I would build and I would maintain websites based on those kinds of interests. I've had scottrobertsweb.com, my main website, for a long time, probably almost 15 years. And the name of it, Scott Roberts Web, is short for Scott Roberts Web Services because I used to advertise my web design services. That's kind of how the name stuck. Eventually, and it was probably about 2006, 2007, I really started to develop a passion for spicy food and hot sauce and hot chili peppers and things like that. So I kind of transitioned my website into the blog, and I started to write about things, started to cover different companies and news about hot sauce, and I would review products. Eventually got to the point where the companies would send me their products to review. I gained a lot of notoriety on the web. They saw me getting some traffic. And I became eventually the most trafficked hot sauce blog on the internet.
Wow. Wow, that's great. I actually like the fact that you have a very specific, a niche blog and podcast, and that's really something that got me fascinated about your podcast and your blog. So let me know, how did you get started with podcasting, and how were you able to come to pick a niche that you are looking specifically at hot sauce and fire foods?
Podcasting, that is something I've been a fan of since its inception. Podcasting has pretty much been around since about 2005. I started listening to technology podcasts, and I just became a podcast junkie around that time. I would listen to several throughout the course of a day, every day. And at some point, I thought to myself, man, I would love to be able to host my own podcast, but I never knew what topic to do it on. A couple years later, one of my friends, he had kind of developed a whole podcasting network, and I have to give a lot of credit to him. His name is Mike Wilkerson, and his podcast network is the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network. He did a very popular podcast on the show 24, starring Kiefer Sutherland, a big popular American TV show. And he would just talk about this podcast, and I would hear it and hear just how just the terrific quality. It's very professional sounding what he would do. And I would make recordings of myself, kind of private, and I would practice different things, and I'd always get discouraged, and I think, well, God, when am I going to be able to do something as professional as he does? And then another friend I had decided to create his own hot sauce podcast called Hot Sauce Weekly. and I was a guest on that. I wasn't the main host. I was just the guest. I kind of dipped my feet into the water, and really then I probably started developing my skill for podcasting. And a couple years later, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go full force into this head first. And for the past few years, I've had my own podcast called The Firecast. And, strangely enough, that actually transitioned from a video show on YouTube. I had a YouTube show called The Weekly Firecast. So I just kind of combined everything all into one, and that's what I've been doing ever since with the podcasting field.
Great, great, great. So how did you get to niche? Because, okay, if somebody is trying to start a blog or a podcast, what kind of advice, tip, and strategy would you share with the person?
You mentioned niche podcasting and niche blogging. That is very, very important. Find and also find your passion as well as that particular small niche. Find a sub niche. Find, even if you think it's ridiculous as far as dialing down to a very specific interest, there are going to be fans of that particular interest, no matter how tiny you think it is, no matter how specific you think it is. That is going to be one of the things that's going to set you apart from everyone else. There are a million, that's an exaggeration, probably thousands of websites and blogs and podcasts dealing with business. And, it's so easy to get lost in the noise, to get lost in the crowd if you just have something, a broad general topic. And if it's, something to do, just for instance, the record industry, you want to do it on the music business, narrow it down even further and keep doing that until you become that one place that people will go to for a very specific topic. And also become an expert on that. Be that one authority on something and not be too broad with things. And so my first advice, find that niche topic. Another thing, make sure you're passionate about it. just don't do a podcast because someone told you, well, it's a great marketing strategy. Do it because you want to do it and you love it and you love talking about it. And it's something that you could think of and talk about day and night. That will help you out and people will pick up on that passion.
Awesome. That was quite insightful. Okay, a question jumped into my mind, and that was, for someone who's having a niche blog and podcast, how can that person get to market his blog and podcast on the internet and social media?
Because of social media, it's free. To be on Facebook, it's free. Pinterest, Instagram, it's all free. Everyone should take full advantage of all of these websites, even if you don't personally get into it. There's a lot of people who still kind of shy away from getting on Facebook or Instagram. It's like, well, I don't want to post photos of my children up there, post photos of my family. That's fine. But when it comes to your business, jump in headfirst into social marketing because that is where the people are. That is where they interact. And set up accounts and have it be branded. And again, it kind of goes back to the whole niche marketing thing, specifically what your blog is and what your podcast is, and have that same name across all the different social media sites. Make sure you get that specific username on Twitter and Google Plus, and make a YouTube page and utilize it every day. Post things every day and interact, and just don't post things, actually interact with people, ask questions, comment on things that people do. Show people that you're interested in them as well and be a part of that community. And then when people ask questions, answer them right away. It's a big blessing, almost like a blessing in disguise, what social media has become. Because the old days, you would have to kind of think about spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on radio ads and TV ads and ads in newspapers, and that would be your only avenue of doing things. So, of course, there's word of mouth advertising, but there's only so much you can do in the course of a day. With social media, you could do that all the time now from the comfort of your own home, from your smartphone, whatever you want to do. And also utilize things that are graphical, photographic in nature. People will tend to see a photo of something on Instagram, Facebook, and gravitate towards that. Just don't have it be some text, but show something like that. It will get people's attention. And again, interact with people and really get to know them. And also, as much as you can, try to personally message these people throughout these social media sites and be attentive to their needs and thank them for following you. Thank you for being a fan, for liking their page. And if it's a genuine thank you, people will pick up on that and they will think that you're more personal, that you're a regular person instead of just a nameless, faceless brand on the web.
Great. Something that I have started saying recently is that as leaders, for which the tribe I have built, the Audacity to Lead tribe, most of us are leaders and we are people who have message and passion for something, and we want to influence the world. We want to make some significant impact on the world. Now, looking at having a blog and a podcast, what would you say that having a blog and a podcast would do to a leader's life and to his influence?
It will show that you're an authority, and it will get your message out to people far quicker than a face-to-face meeting. If you gather people in a big conference room, a classroom, you're able to just hit a larger number of people with a more consistent message. And also because it's up on the web, people will see you more as an authority. And it's also easier just to post notices and messages and reminders to people and advice. Again, you kind of go back to the whole thing of being able to reach more people more effectively. They could read and reread your stuff instead of coming to hear you speak, as in a classroom setting, in front of a podium or something like that. And that message will seep into their brains easier and quicker. And I know it kind of sounds silly, but it's all of that. That people will see you as that authority on something. And again, it's having a passion about a particular topic. And if you have that passion, people will see that and you will seem more genuine to them and they will see you more as a leader. I see people all the time who will create a blog on a particular topic. Again, I kind of use, general business or general politics, and they just kind of post whatever kind of generic information up there, whatever they want. But there's really no passion. There's no thought behind it. And people, you need something that will kind of drive traffic to your site. And again, if they see you as a leader and as an authority, they will flock to your site, and it will just help your audience grow in numbers exponentially.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. If anybody wants to connect with you, how can they connect with you?
I usually tell people to go to my main website, scottrobertsweb.com. There's a contact form on there. On that same website, scottrobertsweb.com, there is on that connect form page, there are all my social media links, Facebook, Twitter, my YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff. It's really easy to find me. And because I've taken advantage early on with social media and search engine optimization, you basically just type in my name, Scott Roberts, in any search engine in Google, and a whole bunch of search results with my name will pop up. It's almost too easy to find me, but I will tell people to go to my main blog and ask me questions, whatever it is about food, about hot sauce, about barbecue, about podcasting, about marketing. I'll be happy to answer most any question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I appreciate. And that's it for the interview session of this episode. I want to say thank you to Scott Roberts for being on the podcast today. And say thank you to Scott Roberts. I appreciate sharing your thoughts and insight with us. That was some value that you gave to us. And I want to say thank you. And of course, for you listening, I want to say thank you for listening to this episode. Well, this is where we go into the Q&A session where I'm going to answer your questions. And of course, I'm going to answer questions for 4 persons on this episode. If I didn't take your question on this episode, please note that forthcoming episodes, I'm definitely going to answer your question. The first question comes in from Dubem Menekaya, and this is his question.
Hey, Dale. This is Dubem Menekaya from dubemmenekaya.com. And the question that I wanted to ask is, how do I find the real pain points for my audience so I can serve them better and that I can create content for them better? And then how do I market that towards them? Hope that's not too many questions and that's okay.
Well, that's not too many questions. These are just 2 questions. And so thank you for sending that in, Dubem. Well, for you to identify the pain points of your audience, it's for you to simply ask them. Don't assume this is their pain point. It is in asking that you get to find out what is going on. For example, for me to start talking about blog and podcasts on my own platform, what I did was to ask my audience that what would they like me to talk about more. And I discovered blog, social media, and podcasting as 3 of the things that were consistent. That is, almost every single person who answered the survey I sent out always picked one of these 3. So that was how I got to know that one of the pain points that my audience has or they are facing is with blog, podcasting, and that's why I'm actually running this series. So what I'm going to say you should do is to do a survey. If you can use typeform.com or you can use surveymonkey.com and just do a short survey that you are going to use to just capture just the pain point. That is what your focus is. And you can check the show note of this particular episode, audacitytolead.com/24. I'm going to link the survey I did, and I'm going to link the results I had with the survey, and I'm going to link to this episode so you can pick it from there. That is, if you want to do survey, you can check out the show note of this episode, audacitytolead.com/24, and you'll be able to see how I did mine, and you can model exactly what I did today. Now, another thing you may do, which is also asking, is for you to ask direct questions from people you know within your audience. For example, if you know about 3 to 5 persons directly, maybe they are your friends on Facebook, or you have a direct contact with some of your audience. If you have about 3 to 5 of them, just ask the person, what problems, challenges, or frustrations are you experiencing in your life right now? Of course, I went to your blog to check out your site and to see. What I noticed there was that your value proposition is not so clear. So you might want to work on that value proposition. For example, I'm going to talk about that in forthcoming episodes, of course, but you might want to work on your value proposition such that anybody that comes to your blog or your podcast or listens to your podcast, we clearly know that this is why this blog exists and this is why you are here. So for you to discover that, like I mentioned, is for you to run a survey or you to do direct questioning, ask someone directly. And of course, the third point will be for you to be clear about your value proposition. And for that, Dubem, send me a mail and let's have a chat together. And I'm going to walk you through how you can do that. Aside picking the model I gave on the show notes for this episode. So thank you for that. Okay, so Dubem, your next question is about marketing your blog. I want to believe that this episode, especially the things Scott shared in this episode, answered that for you. So you can pick the tips and strategies that Scott shared in this episode and use those same tips to market your blog. And so that is that. Okay, the next question comes from Uche Anigbogu, and Uche asks, what is podcasting all about and how can I connect actively to it? Uche, thank you for your question. One thing I'll tell you about podcasting is that podcasting is simply a way for you to share your message with the world using audio format. The difference between podcast and just an audio message that you upload online is that a podcast can be subscribed to. A podcast is in episode format or the episodic. A podcast is something that continues for a long while, not just once in a while message that you share with the world. And of course, a podcast is something that engages people and teaches people something, and it's more specific. This episode, for example, Scott talked about how you can niche your focus with your blog and your podcast. And I think that should also answer your question. And talking about how can you connect actively to a podcast, I'm aware you use a BlackBerry phone. So if you go to your media folder, you are going to see a podcast app. And of course, the podcast app allows you to subscribe to podcasts. And of course, you can also download podcasts. So the way for you to actively connect to podcasts is for you to go to, you can also use iTunes anyway. If you use an Android phone, you can download Stitcher app, STITCHER. I'm going to link to that in the show notes of this episode, audacity.com/24, so that you can download it directly. And if you use an iPhone, you can also, of course, iPhone already has iTunes. So iTunes has podcast section and you can listen to podcast. That's how you can connect actively to podcast. Thank you for your question. The next question comes from Michael Agene. Michael asks, how do you monetize a podcast? Well, Michael, your question is something that is common to almost everybody. And there are 4 ways that I'll tell you that you can monetize your podcast. Number 1 is sponsorship. Number 2 is true products that you offer or other people's products. Number 3 is true services. And number 4 is true programs. So you can monetize a podcast. Those are not just the 4 ways, but of course, those are 4 common ways for you to monetize a podcast. Again, I repeat, sponsorship, products, services, and programs. So you can monetize your podcast that way. The next question comes in from Oluwakoya Aina from our Facebook page, from Audacity to Lead Facebook page. And it says, I would like to start a WordPress blog. Please, how do I connect and what is your advice? Aina, thank you for your question. I'll simply say for you to start a WordPress blog, for now, you can start with wordpress.com. And of course, that is free and you can go ahead and launch your blog. And if you're for my advice, I'll advise you that before you start at all, you should get clear on what you want to really do with the blog, because the goal determines how you name your blog. The goal also determines how you structure your blog. So I'm going to advise that you start with wordpress.com so that you get your hang on it. You understand it very well before you upgrade to wordpress.org, which is also free. Of course, WordPress.com is a free platform which doesn't require any hosting or any domain name. But if you are going to go to WordPress.org, it requires that you have your host and you have your domain name. And that is that for Aina's question. So my advice, like I said the other time, my advice is for you to get clear on what you really want to do on your blog. And that is going to affect every other thing. I'm going to recommend a new guide I just created, Blog with Excellence. Start, grow, and monetize your blog in 10 days or less for you, Aina, so that you can also go through that and you'll be able to understand how to focus your blog. And I think that also will serve for Dubem. Of course, Dubem, you already have a free session with me. So you can send me your details and let's arrange for that. Now, before I leave for this week, I want to give some shout out to two friends. My shout out goes to Belarus of the Light Your Marriage podcast for the review you left for me on iTunes. One thing you said in your review is Dio is clearly having fun recording and chatting with his guests, and it makes it fun to listen to. I want to say thank you for that. And I want to say thank you for your podcasts, because your podcast was quite enlightening for me. Delight Your Marriage podcast. And you can find that at delightyourmarriage.com. And that's a podcast that is focused on sexual intimacy in marriage. I appreciate that. I want to give another shout out to Andrew Camero of Dream Life Podcast. He featured me on his podcast, and in fact, as I sat down to record this, I received a message from Andrew that the podcast episode where I'm featured is already live, and I'm going to link to that in the show notes of this episode, audacity.com/24, so you can pick it from there and you can listen. And of course, if you can't wait to listen, you can go ahead right now to andrewcamero.com/10. That is Andrew, the normal spelling of Andrew. Then Camero is spelled CAMERO.com, camero.com, andrewcamero.com/10. And you can listen to my featured episode on Dream Life Podcast. I want to say thank you for listening. Don't forget to join me tomorrow at Social Media Week, where I'm going to be taking you through how you can launch your podcast and how you can start your podcast being in Africa, and how you can tap into the podcast opportunities that exist in Africa. And so that's where we are going to end this episode of Audacity to Lead. I want to thank you again for joining me. If you have questions you want me to answer, you can record your voice and send it to me if you use a smartphone, dayo@audacitytolead.com. Even if you don't have a smartphone, you can send me a mail at any time, dayo@audacitytolead.com, and I'll be glad to answer your question on the podcast. Thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow at Social Media Week. Enjoy. Be blessed.